So, Pat, we know that especially when we're looking at children and their development trajectories, boys, especially when we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, they lag about 2 years behind when you compare it to the development of girls.
Sure.
So I think you know where I'm about to go with this.
Well, let's say it anyway.
Yeah. So we discussed before we started recording.
Yeah.
It was a new article in the psychiatric, like APA, one of the APA magazines that was pushed out.
That we all read like 3 times over.
We
Exactly,
all read it 3 times over. Psychiatric
time. Shout
Go
out.
get your copy today. It's invigorating.
Yeah.
Right. So it mentioned that boys actually are diagnosed with ADHD about twice as often as girls. In fact, I have here the prevalence rate in young boys is about 13%, whereas in young girls is about half of that. Do you think some of that has to do with the lack of prefrontal cortex development that we see proportional to females when we look at them at the same stage of development?
That's a really great question that I'm not going to be able to answer. Like, I just don't know the answer, unfortunately. And if I was like, say, like to make guesses, right? And I were to say like, oh, maybe if I were guessing at anything, I'd say, well, probably what we're looking at is just a typical developing boy who people are just misallocating, right? Use that word again, misallocating a diagnosis that's convenient to. Right. Saying like, oh, look how hyper they are. Look how they're not making good decisions, not good decisions, but like making good executive decision making versus their female counterparts. Yeah. I mean, truthfully, I think if I were to, and I don't know what that article said, by the way, because as we said, we read it 3 times, but no, I mean, I haven't had a chance to read it myself yet. But what I tend to see and experience is that I think people attribute certain gender expectations to boys, certain gender expectations to girls. And I think, sometimes there's things, we want to see a pattern. We want to see something fit a mold we're used to. And I think sometimes what happens is girls get missed. Girls get missed more often in the diagnosis than boys get. I think, I think I could go both ways on what I just said, but, I think, sometimes how could the quiet girl, right? How could the quiet girl who's not running all over and playing sports, right? How could they have ADHD? And I think that's wrong that we do that. I'll be honest, so I've been with Virtue at a Castle for almost 6 years now. And in that time, I have never seen a gender difference associated with girls versus boys.
For ADHD or okay.
For ADHD specifically. Sorry. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for asking. Thanks for clarifying rather. I've never really seen the difference. Now, look, I mean, I'm a guy who works in a community health center, right? Like my experience is what my experience, my patient population is very biased in terms of this is what I see. But, and so, if you take the larger pool of information and look at it, maybe it says what I see is not correct. But I would generally say that I feel that the girls that I see are probably missed more than they're actually diagnosed. And versus the boys who I think get, people are easy to diagnose them. They're more willing to diagnose it. And I don't know if I've expressed that quite eloquently, but it's still what I mean.
No, I mean, I think it makes total sense. Like, I feel like when we all think of that stereotypical young ADHD male, we can all picture that in our heads, like running around, just like crazy and intense. And that girl, like you're saying, is it manifests perhaps in a different way. Maybe it's because their prefrontal cortex is growing at a faster rate at that age when they're young. What confuses me the most about ADHD is, your neurobiological explanation I thought was super badass. Who we're trying to make this content for is people who work in the mental health industry. So I think that they're really going to appreciate that.